Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Aladdin. I wanted to comment on this debate, though I usually don't do debate commentaries and I usually don't watch these debates because I think they're kind of a waste of time. I wanted to comment on this one because I think the topic is important and interesting, and it shows two opposing sides in the Muslim community. Not the only two sides of this kind of debate, but two very prominent ones. I won't go into depth about each of the points that they made because this is not my debate to have. However, I will comment on what they said and I'll show some clips here and there. So without further ado, here are my thoughts.
Firstly, I feel it's straight out of some medieval Hindu Upanishad book.
Lower marriage value, like this is something that is very basic. Oh, you exposed me. I'm a men's rights activist.
We just want to protect our women from us. Who are those two? Well, this is Safiyyah Sabreen. This is her About section of her channel. She believes that Islam and science are fully compatible and she wants to teach people how that is the case. It is kind of a noble cause, however, I think it's a very difficult one. In one of her videos, she claims that Islam is partially responsible for or should take credit for the scientific method, which is not the topic today. Daniel Haqiqatjou, on the other hand, is kind of tricky to label because I don't know if he classifies as an apologist for Islam because he just makes things worse, but he is known for his unapologetic and regressive views. However, he does cite a lot of verses and hadith to support his point, not necessarily saying that he's citing them correctly, but he does have a lot of basis in the scripture. So let's start with the thumbnail. It's hilarious to me because I think he blurred her face out because it's haram to see a woman's face like that. However, he talks to her for about 2 or so hours. So aren't people seeing her face animated and everything? The topic here, the title of the video is Feminist Hijabi Debate, even though she doesn't like to call herself a feminist, by the way. Should Muslim women go to college? It's insane. And to add some context to this, I feel like non-Muslims would see this debate and think, what the hell is even the point of this? Because obviously, yes, women should be allowed to go to college. But in our world, a Muslim's world, it's still a question. It's still something to be discussed.
In my world, everyone's a pony, and they all eat rainbows and poop butterflies.
Thankfully, in reality, a lot of Muslim women do get an education. What they do with it, however, is another topic. Some of them are told not to use their degrees and get jobs, but at least they do get an education. But in this debate, Daniel is arguing that they shouldn't. So just to let you know, the debate sucks, and I wouldn't advise that you go watch it, but this is not a play-by-play, so if you do want to spend some time getting your brain fried, go ahead and do that. And I will critique both because I don't agree with either of them, and I want to be fair. So let's start with her opening. She says that she is not a feminist and she doesn't like feminism. She seems to be knowledgeable on Islam. You can argue to what extent, or you can argue that she's misunderstanding Islam, but whatever the case, she does seem like she knows a fair bunch about Islam. She claims that Islam emphasizes women learning or encourages women to learn, and she uses some examples of Muslim women who either taught or were responsible for starting a university or some other one-off examples here and there.
Even the most vile and Islamophobic Orientalists on surveying Muslim history were forced to concede how Muslims revolutionized the pursuit of education. And we all know that it was a Muslim woman who established the world's first degree-awarding university, the University of Qayrawiyyin.
And she even cites the example of the Prophet and his companions' wives reiterating hadiths, so the sayings of the Prophet, as some level of education because they were learning those hadiths to transmit them. Daniel, on the other hand, thinks that empowering women through education has a negative impact on society. And he thinks that it messes with the power dynamic. I mean, it's in the name, empowering women.
I know this sounds shocking to some, but hear me out. What I mean by empowerment is increasing social status and power through education or career. Islam does not encourage women to gain power in this way. In fact, Islam is against it.
And the power dynamic, as he puts it, is الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are dominant over women. They're caretakers of women and so on. That's this verse right here. And she doesn't disagree with that verse per se. She can't really disagree with that verse. She concedes to this dominance being more of a providing nature. She calls it al-qawwama. And it's difficult for her to defend it, but she sort of does. There's also a hadith where the Prophet makes it very clear that he doesn't think women can or should lead. She also doesn't say anything about that.
Can women be the sultan in Islam according to the Sharia?
No. But
That's
it's
patriarchy.
not because...
So only men can be the Khalifa? Only men
patriarchy.
can be the sultan?
Daniel argues that women should be taught, they should get an education, but the learning, or the knowledge in this case, is religious knowledge. He highlights that very well. And he mentions how this is only for the sake of teaching their children or other women or adhering to it. It's not about sciences.
So this was a mischaracterization because Muslims, we do educate women in terms of valuing religious education. And we just don't mix. We don't mix the genders in one setting, and we don't send women for this kind of career advancement, because the priority for women and what is actually in women's nature is to be mothers, to get married, to have children, to take care of a family. That is nature that Islam is constantly trying to institutionalize.
And that's a recurring theme, by the way, that I keep seeing, that Muslims say that Islam encourages learning in general, when some people might understand it that way, but in reality, Islam encourages learning so that you find God. Like every time that it's mentioned, well, I don't want to say every time, but often it's mentioned in the Quran, اقرأ, or أفلا يتفكرون, or something like that. Don't they think? Read. These are just in the context of, if you thought more, or if you learned more, you would realize that this is Allah. It's all about read and learn about Islam. It's really about finding God. It's not about knowledge in general. Like in Islam, for example, the word ulama means scientists, but it doesn't mean scientists of science necessarily. It means scholars. So someone can be أعلم, right, of Islam, and it's the same word that they use for a scientist. So there's a lot of confusion about what this knowledge is. But I digress. And Daniel says that the examples that she uses to highlight, important Muslim women, more often than not, are related to some important male figure or another, a husband, a father. She had an inheritance, and it seems like she's not arguing against that, and it seems like he might be right. He says that when women are more educated, they are more unhappy. Society is more unhappy in general, and there are more divorces. And I find that to be hilarious, because he doesn't notice how when women are empowered, when they're given the choice to leave, when they know that there is better, they could do better, they leave. And he sees that as a negative, as if it's that they were going to be happy otherwise. No, it's just that they wouldn't know that there was going to be better. They wouldn't know that the world is truly not supposed to be male dominated. Something that Daniel keeps repeating is, zina is going to go up. If women go to these universities and colleges and mingle with men, there's going to be more premarital sex. And the funny thing is, he doesn't realize that it takes two to tango, Daniel. I mean, usually, unless it's the kind of follower of Daniel's channel, then maybe they can handle it themselves. If you were a musical piece, you'd be a solo, if you know what I mean. So I don't understand how they would attribute that uptick in zina to the women being the one learning. Why can't the men stay at home then? Just remote learn in that case. If you're concerned about them mingling causing premarital sex, then why are you blaming the women? He also makes another silly point, which is that, I'm not going to comment on whether or not that is true, but apparently women always want men in a higher status than them. And if women are learning and they're being empowered, they're going to go up in status and education and so on. And there are going to be fewer men to date. The dating pool is going to be lower for women because they want better men. And the dating pool for men is going to be lower because they can't afford those women.
The problem is, as women are empowered and rise in their social status, that means the pool of men they can marry decreases.
So in other words, don't teach our women. We want them dumb so that our dumb men can have women. So he's catering to the needs of the dumbest of the men. Or not necessarily dumbest, but the least educated. So to put it in other words, stop improving women's situations. We want them desperate enough to get with lower quality men, as you would put it. And he says that divorce rates have been going up in the Arab world lately, and he attributes it to more education of women and more empowerment of women.
Today in the UAE, where women's education is soaring, 62% of marriages end in divorce within just the first 4 years, according to government statistics. So women's education is directly tied to the modern collapse of marriage and family.
And like I said before, that's probably because they're realizing that they're able to escape. They're realizing that they can do better, and they're getting more rights to be able to do that. Because as we know, and if you don't know, now's your chance to learn, in Islam, a man can divorce his wife with a word. A woman cannot divorce her husband that way. She has to go in front of a judge and make a case as to why this is an unfair marriage, or why her husband is beating her too harshly, and that's why she could ask for a divorce. I wonder why more women are getting divorced now that they're able to. Daniel says that women's sense of morality emphasizes care, and men's sense of morality emphasizes justice, and that's why men are better suited for leadership. Aren't all wars started by men? I'm not going to get into that point. I'm just relaying what he was saying. Safiyyah, though. Oh, Safiyyah. She is so anti-feminism. She's arguing that feminism isn't that common in the Arab world, and that Daniel is using American statistics. He cites some other statistics in return, but she kept focusing on his articles. She wasn't there to talk about the topic at hand. She just kept citing some stuff that he said from articles. Some of it was relevant to women's education, but a lot of it was about women in general.
Who are these Muslim women? I want to ask you this question because the question is, who are these Muslim women who need to be saved from feminism? Are you talking about so these are the US stats he always uses. US is a non-Muslim country.
And she kept trying to poke holes in the statistics that he used in some of his points from those articles, poorly at times. But worst of all, she was just not addressing the topic at hand. He rightfully pushes back at some point and shows her that what she's saying has no basis in Quran or fiqh. She doesn't really cite any of those. She cites some examples of influential women in Islam, and that's about it.
Note that you didn't respond to my points about how within the Quran, within the Sunnah, within the scholarly tradition, we see no claim that women should be empowered, let alone go and pursue empowerment and social advancement through education. Nowhere do we find that. All you've done is cite and cherry pick examples of women and say that this somehow supports women's empowerment.
He brings up another good point, which is, if that's the case, if women were empowered by Islam, as she claims, then why are most of the scholarly works, if not all of them, are by men? She counters by saying that women weren't in it for the fame or for the notoriety, which doesn't make sense because you'd still expect more female names than just what she cited. And somebody cited this hadith. This is the kind of thing that empowers those people, where women are covered till they're unrecognizable on their way home from the mosque. She uses this example of Shifa bint Abdullah, who was a muhasiba, apparently, and they have a back and forth about what that means, because she claims that it means accounting, and he claims that it has to do with hisbah, which is keeping people accountable through beating them if they don't go pray or if they're not covering up enough and so on.
When you mention Shifa bint Abdullah and you say that she's an economist or like a health and economy minister, do you know what she really was when you actually go to the sources? She was in charge of hisbah for women. Do you know what hisbah means? That means she had a whip, and if women were not covered properly, she would whip them.
And I find that a little bit funny. Can you imagine this scenario? So my grandma just died. She was a very influential woman in her community, and she will be missed. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. What is it that your grandma did? Well, she was an accountant. Oh, okay. And or she used to beat women with a stick when they didn't cover up enough. Not sure. What? How is it not clear what her role was? Why is there any confusion at all? And as they're talking about this, look at his grin. Look at how giddy he is about it. Yeah, she used to beat other women.
She had to check the
quality
of stuff.
What is the Arabic word for
Muhasiba.
Muhasiba. Hisbah. What's hisbah?
Hisbah, what do you mean by what's hisbah? The actual job profile is written in the same article.
What is muhasaba? What is
hadith.
it? What is
muhasaba actually means to surveillance, basically. You go and check. Not on the women. It's written. I'm sorry, not on the women. She used to check the quality of the goods.
It's psychotic how he talks about this topic. And she gives an example of another woman, but she also mentions that she has to travel with a mahram. So she has to travel with a male member of her family, and in this case it was her father. Even within her progressive Islam, she still has to concede that a woman can't go anywhere on her own without her father. So he brings up a good point. How could a woman be a scholar while she can't even travel on her own? How could a woman go around and collect hadiths like a lot of these male scholars did if she can't do that freely? And though it's difficult for her to counter every point that he's making and then make her own, she was barely doing either. And Daniel, on the other hand, he thinks that the point of secular universities in the Middle East is to liberalize and secularize the Muslim world, and that they teach atheism and they lead to kufr. Could it be that more educated people are less gullible? Could it be because people are exposed to new cultures, new ideas, and they realize that they're not alone in the world? There are a lot of other good people who don't believe in their religion. They're not the villains that Islam makes them out to be. They're not the gullible idiots or evil people that Islam makes them out to be. Could it be that this is why they leave Islam? No, it must be because they're brainwashing these kids into atheism. He keeps harping on how a woman should stay at home and she should be provided for, and if that happened, everything would make sense, everything would work out. And since a big claim of hers is that the Prophet and Islam put emphasis on teaching women and that it was equally platforming women in a way, that was extremely hard to defend. For example, she claimed that the Prophet would set aside one of the 7 days of the week to teach women, and he very easily retorted, well, why is it only 1 out of 7 days? Why shouldn't it be half the days if it's truly that the two genders are equal in that sense? He even used the example of teaching. When God taught Adam the names of everything, he taught a man. He didn't teach Hawa anything. All the prophets are men. It's obvious that the focus of Islam is men being in power. I am not agreeing with Daniel because I like his points. I'm not agreeing with him because I like him. God knows I don't. But that's the easiest thing to infer from Islam. And I feel bad for her because she kept trying to bring up points like, well, Islam doesn't explicitly deny this, it doesn't explicitly deny that, but she can't counter the examples where Islam explicitly puts down women. And I feel bad for her because she's just trying to reconcile her idea of Islam with reality. She's trying to make Islam work. She wants to improve things for women while also keeping her faith. It's very difficult to do, and it's very difficult to defend given the source material that she's given. She has to concede that women have to obey men in specific contexts.
You said Islam doesn't have patriarchy, so we have to look at what the word patriarchy means.
No, Islam has qawama. We have to look at the word what qawama means. Daniel, you are doing the opposite thing.
What's the definition of patriarchy?
What you tell me? How is the Hindu society patriarchal? Tell me. We don't care about what.
Look, this is.
Do we? I care
it's
about
on your
what
slide.
means.
It's on your slide. So if you don't define it, how can you say it's not equal to qawama?
That is so. I must say, I thought I was actually debating.
And I feel bad because she seems like the kind of woman who would have been unrestricted. She would have achieved a lot more if she didn't have to waste her time trying to make sense of the nonsensical. If she could put these efforts into educating women, period, not educating them about how Islam and science can go together, it would be a lot more beneficial for her and everyone she's trying to educate. And this guy, this smug incel, you want to know how incel he is? He uses this argument, the fertility argument, saying that women are missing out on their most fertile years when they go to study at university. And if that doesn't strike you as an incel, red-pilled men's activist talking point, then I don't know what will. Which, by the way, he admits to all of those things, minus the incel part.
Oh, you exposed me. I'm a men's rights activist.
That applies to his followers more than him because I think he's married or was married. She argues against this fertility argument by saying that the Muslim world is already expanding in numbers because of how many kids Muslims have. And she says that this is saving the Muslim world from failing, but in Western societies, they're festered with liberalism. Again, I want to remind you that because of the restrictions put on her mind by Islam, she has to take very difficult positions, and she ends up with bad conclusions like these. Let me give another example. She says that this kind of fertility argument is so Hindu and pagan and filthy.
Firstly, I feel it's straight out of some medieval Hindu Upanishad book. Literally, this idea is very Hindu, it's very pagan, it's un-Islamic.
And are we surprised, really, that this is what a progressive Muslim would extrapolate from Islam? I mean, Islam keeps harping down on this point that disbelievers and polytheists and whatever other outgroup are evil, they're bad. Even if you think that that's what God meant in a specific context, it's not that unreasonable for a Muslim to extrapolate from that and apply it to other disbelievers or non-believers or polytheists today. If that's the source material, why have a Pikachu face? And it's funny, when he asks her who is the head of the household, she doesn't really counter that much.
Who is the head of the household in a marriage according to Islam? Who is it? Is it a man or a woman? Or is it equal?
I'm going to talk to you on this.
Answer. Why can't you answer the question?
Yeah, I will. I've answered all your questions. So
that's
this
patriarchy.
Comes back.
Islam,
no, listen,
Islam
that is not
men.
patriarchy.
Because she knows, according to Islam, the man is the head of the household. She then says that in Judaism or Hinduism, they burn their widows or something.
Because are you comparing Islam with Judaism? Then are you comparing Islam with Hinduism? Then they burn, because of their patriarchy, they burn their women whenever a woman's husband dies. Or for example, the Christians consider a woman the source of all evil.
I don't know where she's quoting this stuff from, but it's mighty irresponsible. And then she'd be the kind of person who cries Islamophobia when somebody cites things in context or out of context about Islam. In fact, funny enough, she says that Daniel, like the Islamophobes, is cherry-picking hadith and verses, when it's funny because she seems to be the one who's cherry-picking just as he is, if not more. And to counter this fertility argument again, she mentions the Prophet's wife Sauda. Sauda was an older woman, and she wasn't particularly attractive as the narrations go. What she doesn't realize or doesn't remember here is that Sauda had to give up some of her rights so the Prophet would keep her, and that legitimized this sort of process. This is actually from the Quran. If a woman worries that her husband will leave her because she's getting too old, too ugly, or whatever it may be, she can concede some of her rights, her so-called rights, things as basic as being provided for, or like her clothing and stuff. She can give up some of that, some money, so the husband would keep her. And then she brings up Sauda as if that's an example of how Islam doesn't focus on a woman's fertility or youth or attractiveness. And there's a hadith that they discuss where the Prophet advised somebody, you should have married a virgin instead.
So, but if you want to talk about marriage value, and you cited this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ advising and giving nasiha to this Sahabi to marry a virgin. And you're saying that this is just a very specific advice to one particular Sahabi. No, where are you getting that? This actually has been understood by scholars as general advice. And why is it general advice? Because it's human nature. It's human nature. Yeah, there can be many exceptional women who are older, who are not virgins, who would make amazing wives. So there's no contradiction between those Sahabiyats being very valuable women and the general advice to marry virgins and to marry young. There's no contradiction in that. And in fact, it's human nature.
And her only defense was it only applied to a specific context, when in any context that would be problematic. I just don't understand the cognitive dissonance here. And to reiterate, this is not me siding with Daniel or something. This is just reiterating that is such little wiggle room given the source material that she has. And then look at this neckbeard talking about lower marriage value and fertility windows.
Lower marriage value, like this is something that is very basic, and I don't know why you don't want to understand this. Men have this natural inclination to women who are in a particular age range, a fertility window. All men have this kind of natural default.
Like, he's only a Chad, to borrow some of their terminology. He's a Chad in a world of incels, in a world of betas. I guarantee most of his commenters are just pathetic little teenagers who seem to think that the way that they're behaving is going to get them a lot of women in heaven and maybe a good wife in this life. You think any guy can pull off saying something so sexist while also looking at this without Islam? Like, at least other guys who have these sort of sexist podcasts, they are usually decent looking, they're charismatic, there's something to make up for it, to make them believable. But this guy, he could pull it off somehow. I mean, if you want to go back to the desert and have your little commune where the women stay at home, the men provide for them, and the men have intercourse without pulling out because apparently the Prophet said it doesn't really matter, then go ahead, be my guest. I'm sure you can petition some government or another to give you a little bit of desert land and give up all kafir technology, just do it the way that your forefathers have done. Or I guess the forefathers of the Arabs who had Islam to begin with, not a convert, I suppose. And see how many women would willingly join your commune. I bet it's just going to be a huge circle of men who are patting each other's backs about how women suck and men rule. And then to justify his position on virginity or why marrying a virgin is better in every situation, or it's something that everyone's inclined to do, he talks about an example of two
equally pious, equally knowledgeable men that come to you as a suitor, and you have to choose between them. One is rich, one is poor. You have the right to choose the rich one. In fact, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the more rational choice. Just like if two women come, same level of knowledge, same level of piety, same level of lineage, and come to a man, and one is a virgin and one is not, it is actually preferable for him to marry the one who is a virgin, all things being equal.
And I found that to be problematic on many fronts, because neither of them was discussing which man does she like, which man is she more compatible with, what are their personalities like. No, they're reduced to some characteristic or another. And he doesn't use this example with men. He doesn't say if you have two men, for example, one is a virgin, one isn't, and they're similar in every other way. No, he uses the women. It's like their mentality is restricted to two things, just women and money. So let's talk about the tone of this discussion.
So you found my secret membership? You found my secret membership in the men's rights movement? Oh no, I've been exposed! It's exposed! Oh, DH,
There is more.
It's the end. You ended my career.
The comments, for example, from the beginning were just very hostile and vile. And how somebody managed to find 100,000 subscribers with that kind of rhetoric shows us how dangerous it is to rally behind an idea that has such power over people. Even his mods are awful. His moderators are awful. Can you imagine the commenters? But right out of the gate, she was hostile to him, and I understand why that is. I get that she's probably charged because of the things that he says about women in his articles, the thing that he says about somebody like her, right? She's on the receiving end of it, not me. So I can only empathize, but I can't put myself in her shoes. She accuses him of having ties to an extremist organization, and she doesn't substantiate that on this stream. I'm not going to comment on that further. That's not how you debate. That's not how you win a debate or even participate in one. On the other hand, Daniel was laughing as she spoke from the beginning, probably reading the comments, the fantastic comments. And in that moment, I realized how pathetic not this exchange per se, but this person specifically is. He's just enjoying all this clout that he's getting from these young, impressionable, sexist men, just clapping for everything that he says and does.
I enjoyed that a lot.
This is the peak of his existence. Like, he's so proud of himself in these moments. He's just happy and giddy about this schoolyard bullying that he's doing. I shudder to think about how well one of these dawah people would do if they had a better personality, if they were more charismatic, if they were more manipulative in a subtle way. They would probably be unstoppable. There were comments about her being unmarried and ridiculing that.
Look, Safiyyah, this is your future. This is your future. If you don't get away from this feminism, this is your future. Look at these cats.
And towards the end, he was trying to sleazily sound like a good guy.
But I was sincere. I was sincere when I said that we want to help the sister. Then my next question would have been, how old are you?
So as you can see, low quality discussion from both sides. Now let's talk about some of his worst moments, and then I'll talk about some of hers. In this screenshot of an article of his, he claims that feminism is why people in the Arabian desert, I suppose, used to bury their daughters before Islam, because feminism. I don't even have time to get into that, and I won't. And this question, somebody donated like $70 to ask him this one question. So if women aren't getting educations, how do we get somebody like a female OBGYN, a female doctor to treat women? Otherwise it's going to be men treating women. How do we get those? And Daniel demonstrates how critical thinking is such a rare, precious mineral, because there's so little of it to go around, apparently.
This is an argument that's always brought up when we talk about women's education. What about the women doctors? So in terms of statistics, in the United States, this means that there are almost 3 OBGYNs for 10,000 women. So if this is a fard kifaya, it can be accomplished we only need 0.0003% of our daughters to get this kind of medical education. So why would we push education, push all of our daughters, all of our women to go to college, to go to medical school?
How do you find the women who have the interest in science and in specific roles without educating everybody to figure out their own interests? Is it just going to be like you're going to be looking at vaginas all day. You're good with a knife, therefore you're going to be a surgeon. How do you find out those women? Think. أفلا يتفكرون? Here's Daniel talking about all of this red pill stuff.
Spend their most fertile years, their most marriageable years, the years where they're at the peak of their marriageability and their, marriage market value, so to speak.
Here he is victim blaming.
But there is a lot of rape that happens on college campuses. This is terrible. This is bad. This is something that Muslims should be shocked by and should realize that this is what is happening in colleges. Why would I send my daughter to that kind of environment?
How is it a point against educating women if you put more women on a college campus, there's going to be more sexual harassment? If anything, that reflects poorly on men, because who's doing the sexual harassment? The majority of those cases are going to be men against women. So you're not making the point that you think you are. All you're saying is men are savages and we have to accommodate for that. Well, specifically men from that background, because we're empowering them to be savages. We're telling them that it's the women's fault. Why would she go there to college? How dare she? We just want to protect our women from us. Here are some of Safiyyah's moments. She brings up that he is a member of some men's rights group or something.
That Daniel is a men's rights activist. He became famous as a defender of Islam against kafir liberal ideologies like feminism. And, well, he subscribes to another Western kafir ideology known as the men's rights movement. So feminism is a women's rights movement and men's right is the male version of feminism.
And even if it is valid that he is a member of those groups, which he is apparently, it's kind of ad hominem because it's not sticking to the point. I wish he had argued more what he was saying. And I feel like both of those people would have been better people without Islam. Like I said, her potential wouldn't have been capped and wasted by arguing with men like him, and he wouldn't be leading an army of incels. He could be doing anything else. It would still be better for society, for humanity as a whole than whatever he's doing. He could have some kind of pathetic podcast about this, however, it wouldn't pick up. She said something, I think unintentionally, when he was citing some stats about on college campuses, I believe, and that was in the US. She said, but those are kuffar. Who cares about the kuffar?
10.9%.
Who cares about these kuffar? Obviously,
you don't care. You don't care if non-Muslim women are raped?
We're talking about Muslims. I don't
care
about.
You said who cares about kuffar?
And he was quick to lurch on that. He was saying, oh, so you don't care about the kuffar, as if he does. As if he doesn't use worse language, he's just trying to score points. However, what she meant to say poorly was, who cares about those stats? We should focus on the stats in our communities. But she's defending a fallacious point with fallacious logic. And she said something very insensitive. And again, it reminds us of this us versus them mentality that religion instills in us. You'd be surprised how many times I've heard, who cares about the kuffar directly. And it was bizarre to me that she prepared slides. And in those slides, she prepared just one slide to call him names, basically. No matter how factual some of these statements were, it seemed not only unprofessional, but it seemed off topic. She could have reiterated this stuff at the end. She could have mentioned it, but she didn't have enough substance in her slides, and she wasted one of those slides with that kind of attack. So here's my conclusion. I side with neither of them, but I empathize with her more. I mean, at the end of the day, she's trying to better things for women. She's not trying to teach men toxic habits like he is. But I think that what she's doing is counterproductive and counterintuitive, because by trying to better things for women within the framework of Islam, it could just lead them to be in situations where they would be harmed by Islam again.
Our men are our protectors, our maintainers, and we Muslim women reciprocate this with our loving obedience.
And perhaps her position is more defensible, but she didn't do a good job of it. I don't know. I'd be interested in watching a similar kind of discussion or debate about the same topic by somebody else as well. But that's what drew me to this discussion, or shall I say, shouting match.
It's exposed.
There is more.
It's the end. You ended my career.
I wanted to know how can someone defend this position that Islam is, she doesn't want to call it feminist, but Islam empowers women and that Islam emphasizes women's learning? I wanted to know what are the good talking points, but I didn't find any. And I hate how the contrast between those two people presents him as the reasonable, calm, collected one, when all it is that he is presented with material that is easier to cite to make his points. It doesn't reflect on reality. But people unfortunately would conflate those two. They're going to see him making good points within the context of Islam, and they're going to think he's right about how this applies to reality. And she hates feminism because feminism does not agree with Islam. But she's trying to have this half-baked feminism where the woman still has some kind of status behind or under men, but she's still great. She might try to explain it in a different way, but she concedes that a man is the leader of the house. So I think that's why she hates feminism, because it goes against her religion. And like I said, even if her version of Islam is true, it is still demeaning to women in other ways. And lastly, this taught me about how somebody can be an absolute idiot, spewing hateful things and be platformed and be very successful because of this powerful tool that is religion. Even if you completely disagree with me in everything that I say, I hope that you notice the contrast between how a lot of us ex-Muslim content creators talk about these topics and how a lot of these popular, famous, successful Muslim content creators go about having their discussions. The amount of money that he was receiving from this is insane. And the fact that he's able to say this while being monetized is weird to me, because most of my videos are not monetized, or they get demonetized because I'm talking about a sensitive topic or another. But apparently if you're using Islam to support your hateful position, then that's fine. Do you want to start a sexist podcast, but you're worried that it'll be demonetized or canceled?
It's the end. You ended my career.
Well, try Islam. With Islam, you can discuss women's worth, reduce them to baby-making machines, dehumanize them, victim blame them, and lastly, beat them. Gently, of course.
Basically, you go and check.
We'll supply you with verses, hadith, and seerah, and 1400 years of precedent to empower you to achieve your full sexist potential. And if you're a white man, don't worry about it. For a limited time only, you get the convert bonus. Believers love a convert. So what are you waiting for? Join Islam now, while secular countries are too nice to stand up to you, and launch your toxic male platform today. Offer valid till the world wisens the fuck up and supplies end. I feel so guilty that people choose to support me monetarily to some degree, and I feel like I shouldn't feel that guilty about it. I've never really asked people to donate to my Patreon. It's in the links, and I do credit the patrons at the end of each video. I may have posted about it once, but I don't ask people to join my Patreon, and I've felt a level of shame and guilt about that. But the reality is I'll never be able to tackle such huge platforms on the other side of things, such hateful, well-funded platforms, if I am too ashamed to ask people for monetary help. This is not my full-time job, and it probably never will be, but I hope to have more space, time, and luxury to be able to work on my videos, because I think that whether you think Islam is true or not, I think that I'm spreading better ideas than somebody like that, and I just can't do it alone. Like the fact that people can throw super chats around and just fill them with stupid or hateful comments, and they shame us for getting some donations here and there, it's pretty sad. But to be clear, I'll be doing this whether I have monetary support or not. Whether I get demonetized completely or not, I will still be here, as long as I have the mental energy for it. And I appreciate your help by liking, subscribing, and interacting with my content. It helps my channel grow. Thank you everybody for being here. As always, think critically and think for yourself.